interesting welcome to all of you in these how else to put it. It's great to be here and and from. Alright, so do a retake.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Yeah, how is it going? All right. So I would really like to welcome all of you to this talk by Kai, Tuchmann and Anuja Ghosalkar, who have been extraordinarily generous and cooperative in these interesting times, such that we've been having a workshop, a documentary theatre workshop since yesterday, and I'm also taking part in it. And in the middle of that, today we are doing this talk by two of them, which concerns documentary theatre and more, and related and other things. So I'd like to introduce in some sort of a formal sense of the kind of work they've been doing, Anuja and Kai, and then the two of them are going to individually make their presentations, after which we will have a discussion. So I'll do that, but before that, I just want to talk a little bit about this workshop and the idea of this workshop on documentary theatre, which is something probably not a very common theme for a theatre workshop, the kind of workshops that we are used to. I myself have not been able to deprive myself of the opportunity of attending the workshop for other reasons, so I really don't know what has been going on in the workshop. But nevertheless, the very theme, the very name documentary theatre is not a very common kind of theatre that we're used to. While, for instance, documentary cinema is a very commonly accepted and understood genre. Yeah. So one of the things that struck me when I was thinking about really how to start the evening was to think about this comparison between documentary theatre and documentary cinema in the very meaning of these two things. It occurred to me, it struck me, that with documentary cinema there is less of a problem with responding to the idea at a very common sense level, because it seems that already cinema is something which has a certain objective character. Because something like a technology of reproduction, of recording things is already there. It seems that it starts on a kind of neutral ground, which is the technical means of documenting it from there. And then you can take a call, you can make a choice about what kind of film you want to make. Do you want to make a fiction film? Do you want to make a documentary? Nevertheless, it's both based on the same fundamental technical thing, which is the apparatus. Just doesn't quite hold for theatre. If you think about the nature of theatre, then already you are in a kind of paradox. On the one hand, theatre is something which already it signifies people putting on costumes and makeup and doing something which is make-believe, which is not true, doing something fictional, which means it cannot be documented. It is not reliable as a document. It's not meant to be documented. That's the fun of theatre. It's all play acting. On the other hand, theatre is also absolutely the opposite of cinema, in the sense it is entirely life. It's entirely duration, which is what we actually mean by performance, something which happens here and now. And to that extent, theatre is that much more authentic than any technical reproduction. So from that angle, also theatre is not, it's more reliable than a document, or more true than a document, because document by its own meaning is already objectified. It's partly dead, and theatre is not. So for both these reasons, it seems, theatre seems to elude the idea of a document. And yet, historically, and Kai is going to talk about Peter Rice and all that, there has been a tremendously vigorous documentary theatre movement and many such movements in the history of theatre. So how does that contend with this intrinsic nature of theatre, which seems to be on both sides, not really at the same level as the idea of a historical document? That's the one question which occurs to me. The other one is, of course, the meaning of document itself. So usually we think of document as something archival, something historical. But in our times, right here in our country today, document is political and nothing but political. Go to Assam, go to the Northeast, go to the Citizen Amendment Bill today, and you have absolutely no way of thinking in any other way. Document is political and nothing but political. Document is the same thing as existence, either legal or not legal, legitimate or not legitimate. You know. So already we have moved beyond the limited scholarly understanding of a document. So anyway, these are some thoughts which I'm sure can come back in different ways at the end of these two presentations. So now it's my pleasure to introduce, first let's start with Anuja. Anuja is an artist from Bangalore, but has worked in several cities of this country, in several places in this country, including Bombay. That's where I first saw her perform. So she's a performance artist, someone who acts, but also has curated, and she and Kaya have been curating the documentary theatre series of workshops and conducting these workshops across the country, but also presented the work abroad. And she has been writing on cinema. She has also been writing on cinema, so the cinema concern is very much at the heart of her work. We are having a very interesting symposium on documentary theatre in Serendipity at Goa the coming week. So that is something Kai and Anuja are organizing and curating, and I've been fortunate to be also, been invited by them. So yeah. So all of that is going on. So really what's happening in JNU is in the middle of something which has been going on for a long time and promises to carry on further. Kai is a dramaturg and a director, and he worked as a dramaturg in other places, but at this point he's in Beijing, and he's a dramaturg with a theatre company in Beijing. He's somebody who's interested in, and he's going to talk about one of the first milestones of the documentary theatre movement in Germany, associated with a great playwright called Peter Weiss, whose play Marasad a lot of us know. But his document is manifested on the documentary theatre, which is something Kai is going to talk about. And Kai and Anuja, like I said, have been together curating and doing these documentary theatre workshops. So with this sort of sporadic, just staccato introduction, I think the best introduction is to hear them. Hear the thoughts and work. Let me invite Kai to make his presentation, and then we'll have Anuja, and then a round of questions and answers. So Kai,
Shuma, thank you so much for this very nice introduction, and also for, I think I can speak in both our names, for making this here possible, the workshop and also this presentation. I would ask the audience if I turn too low with my voice, please raise your hands, okay? So, and remind me to speak up and so you do so. Let's see. So, after all this introduction, I just want to point out the direction of my talk. So it is about introducing this concept of documentary theatre to you, and I want to dive into its historical context a little bit. So where does it come from? Why has it formulated itself and its main assumption at a certain point in time? So what kind of symptom is it? So I want to ask a little bit, and I also want to refer some of its main assumptions and also paradoxes. So, because these assumptions, as we will see, are not consistent in a radical logical way, but it's good. So, my starting point for all this will be the reading of these 3 pages, which is the manifesto that in German just is entitled Notes Towards the Definition of Documentary Theatre. In the English, they put this other thing, this other sentence above it, the material and the models. So and basically my talk will be a close reading of this text. And very particular, because what Shomo referred as interesting times, I thought when I now here with Anuja at JNU, I wanted to undertake a reading of this text that especially points out the function of protest that Peter Weiss is assigning to this particular form of theater. And for this it's very important to keep in mind that this text was conceived in 1968. So which was like a peak time of the German student movement in that what we call West Germany. So there were a lot of protests going on that formulated itself outside of the parliament. So, and to some extent, Peter Weiss tries to develop an idea of theater that is able to relate to these protests. And this is pretty much the core of my first part of the presentation. So I want to introduce this, how he is doing this, how he is conceiving theater in times of protest. What are Peter Weiss' core beliefs? What are, for him, the potentials and limits of such a thing? But maybe first, let me address the skeptics among you. Because I very often hear this, that people say, documentary theater, is it really a meaningful category? So when we look at Hamlet, what's that? So we have a play based on a historical chronicle. Even if we go to the very fundamentals of theater, like Western theater, and we look at Aeschylus' Persians, we have a play that deals with real events and to some extent is mashing up documents. So, but still, I think also from a scholarly point of view, the talk of documentary theater is justified. And I will come back later to this problem, and Peter Weiss will be help to explain to you why I think this. Let me briefly introduce the structure of my talk. So first, I will place the history of the documentary theater, like I want to lay down in front of you, with a special regard also to the time and the work of Peter Weiss. In the second step, I want to present the key arguments and quotes of the manifesto, and then I will point out these paradoxes that are intrinsic to his writing and concept of theater I talked about. So let's start with part one, the history of the documentary theater. And I speak also due to my origin and training about the history of the German documentary theater. Also because I think it's a scholarly consensus that people, when they think that documentary theater is a useful category, mostly they begin this historiography then in the year 1925, which was the year in which the first period of documentary theater started with the staging of Erwin Piscator's Despite Everything, which was for the first time in theater history a play that solely was mashed up out of documents, devised through documents. And it depicted something very beautiful, which was the history of all revolutions in human history. So it was a play about the history of revolutions. But this first period was very short, 1925 till 1929. Because then Piscator had to leave the country. So he was a very committed communist. The Nazis took over the power, and it was time for Piscator very early to leave. So he went to the Soviet Union, and via the Soviet Union he then went to New York, where he actually then worked at this new school. And he was the educator of people like Judith Malina, Jeff Beck, the founders of the Living Theater. So it's a little bit like a legacy that then spread out. But actually it was ended. So this experiment of documentary theater ended after 4 years. Then there was a long gap, also due to the Second World War. And it was like at around 1963 that this whole idea of documentary theater re-emerged. But this time it was more through the works of dramatists, while Erwin Piscator was much more a theater maker, like a director. So, and like very significant works of this time, of this second period of documentary theater, are Heiner Kippert's In the Matter of J. Robert Oppenheimer, which investigates the the interweaving of science and power. So because it's a play about the origin of the nuclear bomb. And another play was Rolf Hochhuth's The Deputy, which looked into the role of the Catholic Church in time of the Nazi regime. So you can see most of these plays were very much connected to historical contexts of the German society, the recent German society, that wasn't really remembered among the Germans. So after 1945, something very strangely happened. So the Germans invented this what you would call the mythology of the hour zero. So this is what we call it in Germany, der Mythos der Stunde Null. So meaning this society that participated in some way or the other in the Nazi regime, in the Second World War. In 1945, they somehow agreed on, we can start anew. Now the war is over, now we set up our states in the East and in the West, and actually there is no continuity to all that what has happened. And this was pretty much the belief of the society back then. And these dramatists of this second period, they very much tried to interrupt this mythology of the hour zero and this forgetting. And together with the students, they had this fear that fascism could re-emerge. And to this extent, the second period is also really connected to the protest movements that were happening outside of the German parliament, because within it, there was no place for it. Because this myth of the hour zero also led to the effect that even the politicians, the administrators, lots of the professors, so they still were connected to the old regime, and nobody really talked about this. So, and you could say, and some authors in theater history, they claim that this was something like the symptomatic of this second period. And this is also why some authors claim this second period just went from 1963 till 1970. Because after 1970, this myth was kind of successfully interrupted. And there was no longer that much need of the documentary theater. And there is the most powerful play in relation to this mythology of the hour zero, of course, is Peter Weiss' own play called The Investigation. And I attached a little excerpt of this play in these handouts. I don't want to read it. But it's very important to know that this play was completely based on the courtroom hearings that were happening in Frankfurt, where there was this trial on Auschwitz happening between 1963 and 1965. And all that what was said in the court was recorded. And Peter Weiss made a play out of it. And that was The Investigation. So it's like one of the most significant work, you could say, most representative work of the documentary theater. And it's very interesting also to talk a little bit about the form, because the language of The Investigation is very much shaped and inspired by the cantos that Dante Alighieri is writing in his Divine Comedy. Also the dramaturgy of The Investigation is very much inspired by the dramaturgy of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. So Peter Weiss really picks the progress of the Jewish people from the ramps into the fire of the ovens with each canto. So these victims progress one step more closer, you could say, to the inner circle of hell, which was the annihilation. So that's a little bit like the context also of his most famous play. And to me, it's also very interesting to refer again to this idea of protest, because protest actually in ancient law means bearing witness in public. And with The Investigation, we have a very interesting overlay. So it is something that takes all the documents from the courtroom and also turns theater itself into a public bearing of a kind of an alternative witness that is not existing under this mythology of hour zero. So it's really the testimony in the literal sense, and in the literal meaning, is a gesture of protest. And then we face, and I don't want to dive into this because Peter Weiss is most important here. So since the end of the 1980s, again, people talk about documentary theater in Germany. Most famous representatives, of course, Rimini Protocol, Hans-Werner Krösinger, Milo Rau, Volker Lösch, all these people. I don't want to go too much into this, but it's interesting to see that there is a big difference between these, the first two periods and the third. And this difference is a different belief in the capacity of the document. In Peter Weiss and also in Erwin Piscato's work, they fully believe in the capacity of the document to show history how it really was. This belief is no longer really there in all these theater practices that are happening in this third period of documentary theater. So the people that are using the documents there, they don't make these objective, absolute truth claims anymore. They rather refer to their subjective perspective, and they juxtapose the perspective of this performer with the perspective of the other performer. So always to say, we can no longer really do objective truth claims. So this is, I think, a very, very, very important difference that occurred between these three periods. Now let's go to a closer look to the manifesto here, the notes towards the definition of a documentary theater. It's the second part then of my talk. I want to, so like you see, so there is an introduction to it, and there are in total 14 theses. In my little talk here, I will mainly concentrate on the part 1, 2, 8, and 13, which lay down, and they all have it in a nutshell, so it's so nice to read this. They lay down the definition, methodology, aesthetics of this documentary theater. They discuss its function in society as protest, its technique, and also its very concrete location. This was one of the recent discoveries when I prepared the text, that actually this problem of where can a protest can be performed is a very crucial for Peter Weiss. So he really spends a lot of search and research on the question, how can we protect protest of theater to be consumed by the art discourse? Or just to be, how can we protect it from becoming a vain gesture? So he spent a lot of thought about this. So I want to touch it. Now let's do a little bit like what I said in this handout and also in the thing. I want to do a little bit of close reading here. And I want to read out now the first thesis. Documentary theater, I quote, right? Documentary theater is a theater of reportage, records, documents, letters, statistics, market reports, statement by banks and companies, government statements, speeches, interviews, statements by well-known personalities, newspaper and broadcast reports, photos, and so on are the basis of the performance. Documentary theater refrains from all invention. It takes authentic material and puts it on the stage, unaltered in content, edited in form. On the stage, we show a selection based on a definite theme, generally of a social or political character, which contrasts with the haphazard nature of the news with which we are bombarded daily on all sides. This critical selection and the principles by which the montage of snippets of reality is effected determines the quality of the documentary theater. So, and I like it very much because, of course, the first half is really a definition of what documentary theater is. It's a theater of reportage, and then he gives so many examples of what documents could be. And then he also talks about the methodology of this. And here you really can see that Peter Weiss is very much a child of these first two periods. So he has this unbroken belief in the capacity of the document, because he says the theater should refrain from all invention, because the material, he claims, it is authentic. And when you put it on stage, don't alter the content. So he really believes when you put something on stage, when you perform it, that you could do it in a way that you don't alter the content. So which really makes him a child of this pre-deconstructivist approach of these first two periods. So, and then he also, very nice, gives us a criteria. So how to distinguish bad documentary theater from good documentary theater. It's nice, right, to have criteria. And he says it's all about how critical is the selection of the material and what is the quality of the principle of your montage. Just want to drop it. So, and this very much also relates a little bit to this, what I talked about with the investigation, right? He's not just using these documents from the court. He really plots them in a parallel way how Dante Alighieri devised the Divine Comedy. So there is a strong artistic approach still in the way he works with these materials from the quarto. Second thesis, I start to read out the very first snippet. Quote, documentary theater is a reflection of life as we witness it through the mass media. I unquote here and come back to the skeptics that I talked about in the beginning of my talk. So because this belief that theater is a reflection of life, that's so old, and everybody said that. But what is happening here is, Peter Weiss makes the point, documentary theater is a reflection of life as we witness it through the mass media. And I would claim this is the very difference between Aeschylus and Shakespeare's use of documents to that what we call documentary theater. Because the documentary theater, even from its very first period, uses documents that are mass distributed by the mass media and massively distributed by mass media. So while in Shakespeare's time, of course, the reading of a historical chronicle was a very, very privileged thing to do. So meaning when there is mass media with radio, television, information networks of our times, so the quality of the document changes because everybody can access it now. At least this is the promise. So in the documentary theater relates to this very specific point in time. Let's read also 2.1, so 2a, which I like very much because here gives us a little bit like, why doing it? What's the political thing in it? What's the protest thing in it? And I quote, he says, it's all about critiquing concealment. Are reports in the press, radio, and TV slanted to the point of view of powerful interests? What are we not told? Who benefits by the omissions? To whose advantage is it when certain social phenomena are blue-penciled, modified, idealized? So this is very much the battleground into which he plays this technique of theater. And of course, this also again connects very much to Peter Weiss' own experience as a person who witnessed the use of media, first, especially the radio, in the time of the Nazi regime, where for the first time the language of the capital, the language of power, entered the living rooms of people and committed that, what another scholar called media violence. So I like this phrase very much because this media violence that was implemented through the radio in the Nazi time, very later on, resulted in the dehumanization of certain groups of people. So this media violence very soon can become real violence, and did become real violence in this context. So you could say that throughout, and I don't want to carry on now with reading here everything, because this is also the reason why I distributed it. Through all these theses, number 2 until 9, Weiss develops now the idea that the function of documentary theater consists in the establishment of an alternative public sphere. So he links the idea of protest together with this form of documentary theater. But in the course of these 9 paragraphs I referred to, he asked the question, of course, about the specificity of the protest of documentary theater. Because, of course, like he says in paragraph 6, quote, documentary theater, so long as it does not itself take to the street, cannot compete with an authentic political event, unquote. So the question here is in the room, what is the specificity of the protest of documentary theater? And he says, it's all about this technique of montage in order to create models of our reality that inform the citizen. So he says in the thesis number 7, so these models of reality that documentary theater produces should, I quote, become an instrument for forming political opinion, unquote. So, and when we have a look at the number 8, so, he makes this very important point now where the documentary theater should take place. I quote, hand in hand with the attempts of documentary theater to develop a convincing form, go goes the search for a suitable platform. When the performance takes place in a commercial theater with high prices of admission, the documentary theater is caught in the very system it wants to attack. Outside the establishment, on the other hand, it is forced into places frequented by a small coterie of the like-minded. Instead of influencing conditions, it merely demonstrates its impotence in opposition to those who create them. Documentary theater must gain entrance to factories, schools, sport grounds, meeting halls. So, for them. So, this is so interesting. So, the question of how to shape an audience for this form of theatrical protest turns into the question where to find this audience. Because you will not find them in the already institutionalized theaters. But of course, you also have to be careful not just already to preach to the choir, preach to the already converted. So what Weiss here is suggesting, and this is all about that what I mean with the creation or the relation to the alternative public sphere, is that the political action should be achieved by accessing the places where the social life organizes itself. A documentary theater has to go there. And these examples that he is giving is really important. So, I come to part 3 very quickly. So, I don't want to criticize this project now and individual aspects of it. I rather want to point to, let's say, 2 logical paradoxes that are given in this project. So you see, the claim is documentary theater is based on a relationship, a specific relationship to reality. And this relationship is given through original sources, people who saw something, people who wrote something. But these sources, especially in our time, are just as accessible as copies. So what we have here is an intrinsic paradoxy of the original and the copy. Even Peter Weiss' own play, The Investigation, is a wonderful example for this. Because of course he not himself sat 3 years in the court trial. That was a journalist named Bert Naumann. And he compiled most of his text from this copy of the book written by Bert Naumann. So there is this paradoxy around original and the copy. And then there is a second paradox I want to point to, and it's the paradoxy between the reality and the fiction. Because, and you can do a handstand. What the performers are doing when they are doing documentary theater, they are performing constructed situations. They are performing rehearsed situations. Somebody made decisions to shape the language, like in Dante, or to make the dramaturgy, like in the comedy. So there is also this intrinsic paradoxy of reality and fiction. Reality has to be emblotted to talk about. So, and to me it's very striking that now, since the late 80s, with the arrival of the information networks, we have this revival of the internet, of the documentary theater. Because of course, these 2 paradoxes are the most symptomatic paradoxes that go along with the information networks of the internet. So, I mean, the question, is it for real or is it a fake, is something that we deal with like on a every second when we open our smartphones. And the colonization even got closer. So now they are even on our bodies, these things. Back then the radio was like at a certain place in the living room, but now we carry it at our bodies. It's always there. These accounts of private enterprises, of the state, and so on. So I think you could say to a certain extent the documentary theater is really a symptom of the time of the information networks. And still I think that in the good works of the documentary theaters, these paradoxes are not just doubled. And especially the rereading of Peter Weiss allows us to come to a certain technique of doing theater that is able to name the people who are responsible for certain political decisions and protest against certain political decisions. So I think Weiss Manifesto points towards a form of theater that can contribute to the spectator's political agency in times of mass-mediated reality. So, and he provides us with a technique for a theater in proper times that can nourish our political protest against the media violence by modeling the world in a way that reality, however opaque it may be, can be explained in every detail, which was the title of this.
talks now, and then we go on to Anuja's title. I have to mention it because I really find it very intriguing. It's called The Tongues of Time, and it is, I'm told, a line from another text which she's written, but I had to.
Good evening. I'm Anuja Ghosalkar and I'm your postmistress for the evening. A heartfelt thank you for coming this evening to the reading room. Thank you for sharing your personal letters and agreeing to be part of this experience. You're all very open and very brave. There are no actors this evening. You are the actors. There is no script. The letters that you have brought are the script for this evening's performance. There is no audience. You are the audience. So please be attentive. Some instructions to all the readers. The instructions read, please read slowly. Please read loudly. Please follow punctuations. There may be letters without punctuation. In that case, don't follow it. Please enjoy yourself. Please don't take the letters home with you. Please read with love and care as you would your own letter. Because as the person whose letter you're reading might be in this room. We are sharing very fragile, intimate moments with strangers. So please respect and enjoy that. Don't be afraid to laugh. Some of the letters are funny. Take a deep breath together and let the performance begin. This is how my performance in the reading room begins. I'll just have Supraja and the other girl read 2 letters that I've received during the course of this project, and I'll talk about it. Number 13, can you hold up the envelope, please? The envelopes are all numbered. Yeah. 13, please. Every information on the page.
Level 1, 1990. Professor R. Vijay Raghavan, Dean Physics Faculty, TIFR Drug. Dear Professor Vijay Raghavan,
Email, 17th December 2007. My dearest darling now. God, I wish you were here. Story in short, arranged marriage has reared its head. A proposal in Chennai. Not at all in favor of destination. Topics, maybe an awesome person, but don't feel anything. Horoscopes, family, and the rest of the paperwork matches beautifully. Is this the one? My grandmom fervently hopes so. Everybody says I should meet. I saw the first photo and said, no way. More was sent. Everyone says, nothing was wrong. You should meet. Have exchanged phone numbers. A few messages last night. He was supposed to call this morning. Has not done so yet. Desperately want this to fall through and pursue the dream I've grown up with. Want to fall in love again. So badly. Feel so lost and so much under pressure. Suddenly. He probably feels the same. I don't know. Man, I miss you. Love, me.
Since we decided to not have projections, I wanted to give you an example of what happens in the reading room. So the placards I was holding, they are peppered across the reading room, and we really enjoy the silence. And the idea was to bring letters. So I urge people to bring letters from their personal collections, and we read them alongside ones that I have curated from the public domain. And we sit in a circle and read, and there's a little bit of a twist, because you don't get to read your own letter. You often end up reading somebody else's letter. The idea for the reading room, it's my second project. The first project I did was called Lady Anandi, which is a story of my great-grandfather. I shared stories from my personal archive. But with the reading room, the endeavor for me was to start gathering personal material from other people, from strangers actually. And therefore I put this call out where I said, please bring letters. So what happens is people bring letters, they donate it to me, I sit on a table and I am the postmistress, and then a little bit of curation and fun, I mix up the letters and we read. And people read with trepidation, people read with fear, people read with their accents, people stutter, but we don't stop. And we don't correct them. And people sit in a circle and it lasts for about an hour and 10 minutes, and then we go home in silence. And at the end of the reading room, I urge the people to donate those letters to me. You don't have to, some do, the others don't. And then I take those letters and use them in the next reading room. So a personal archive that I've collected in the moment becomes my material in the next performance. And now over the last 3 years, I've collected close to 100 letters. So with the reading room, the idea was for people to go into their own trunks under their beds and look for material, to look for documents. And it's absolutely stunning how many strangers bring very personal letters. I read out, I gave only 2 really simple letters for time, but people bring love letters, suicide notes, mothers giving advice to their young children about how to have safe sex. And they're sharing all this in front of complete strangers. So it's a very simple iteration that we sit in a circle and read. So why did I come to the reading room? And why do I come after Lady Anandi, which is for me now a very conventional performance, because I perform. I really wanted to see what happens in the theatre when there's no actor. When I work with people who have no acting experience. What happens when there's no script. So I break it down completely and we do it in a small room. Sometimes in someone's living room, in a library, in a store, in places that would open up their space for us. And for the large part in the reading rooms, we used to not charge people because they came with their letters. And something quite wonderful and in my mind quite like a basic thing with documentary theatre starts to happen, that we just read. We trust each other and there is no affect of the actor. People always are afraid. A lot of people break down because they're nervous. They don't want to read in front of others. So we have to hold the space. So like I was saying, there's a contract that all 10 of us get into, and I don't read at all. I'm essentially the only audience person. I only listen. And everybody who comes to the reading room must read. They don't have to bring a letter because we have so many letters, and quite wonderful other things start to happen. We start hearing different languages, styles of writing, because people do bring emails. People don't write letters anymore, so the language of the email that's written in 1992 versus a letter that was possibly written earlier. The other interesting thing that starts to happen is people can't hold paper anymore. Somebody brought a letter once on butter paper because butter paper was easier to post because it's lighter. And the person opening the butter paper was being really rough, and therefore the instruction, please be gentle with the letters and the material they use. People can't read handwriting, but some can read handwriting quite beautifully. So for me, it becomes a really interesting exercise in what happens when complete strangers A are in the same space, B have never performed, and there is no script. And what we're shown is that crazy amounts of narratives come together. They start talking to each other. So taking all of these letters that I had for the reading room, I felt like I need to do something with it. So the British Council asked me to replicate a reading room. Now I don't like to create an artificial reading room. If people bring letters, that's good. So what we did is, some of the letters that we found, I gave them to performers. There was an actor, there was a dancer, there was a photographer, and they started to write fictional responses to the real letters. Also what they did was, this Veronica Rodriguez letter, she's a scientist, we've never seen her, I've never seen her. They started to write her character description. What was she wearing? Where was she sitting? So it became reading room 2.0, to see what happens when we introduce fiction in these real letters. And we read it with character descriptions. So the reading room became material for another iteration, another kind of reading. So this is one project that I wanted to give you an example of, and what reading room did to me, and the idea for that was the idea of authorship. In the reading room, there is no singular playwright. The authorship becomes collective. And I really, as a producer of artwork, lose a lot of control, because I have no control over the kind of letters, over the quality of the letters people bring, or the quality of performances people bring. So I have to really give up every control as the director. It really is an exercise for me to trust the audience, and I place implicit trust in my audience because they always withhold the idea I'm throwing at them. And for me, the first part to come to documentary theatre was I was unhappy with the playwright. I was saying to some of you yesterday, I was uncomfortable with the singular authority of the playwright and his control over my body in performance. So for reading room, I was like, let's break it. Let's have multiple authors that keep changing, multiple voices, different types of performances. So collective authorship was really important to me. And I feel like when they give these letters to me now, I'm becoming a repository of it. And these are very, very fragile personal histories. So what does it do when I'm becoming a collector of these of little narratives versus a big state narrative? Now I hold them with me as not just a performance maker, but maybe as somebody who wants to, I wouldn't call myself an archivist, but somebody who's collecting people's moments. So it places an additional responsibility. This was one example of the reading room, and the reading room is just growing in the number of collections it gets and the number of people that attend it now. Coming to the talk, the title of the talk, I wanted to focus it on two things. One was this idea of collective authorship that I'm interested in as a performance maker, and I will say as a woman performance maker, for me it is important to make that distinction. And therefore I choose Malika Amar Sheikh's poem. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's Namdev Dhasal's wife. Namdev Dhasal is a very, very well-known Marathi Dalit poet. And she writes an autobiography about how he hit her and the violence that, as a Dalit woman, she feels. So I just want to read 4 lines that the second half of my talk will focus on. So the poem is called A Poem for a Dali Painting by Malika Amar Sheikh, translated from Marathi by Sachin Ketkar. The tongue of time, soaked and squirming. Even so, how come these black and red ants of desire are still alive? Who is alive? Is it time? Or is it us? Or is it this shapeless space? This notion of space I wanted to explore through my performance, and last year I was commissioned by the Serendipity Arts Festival to do a site-specific work. And Serendipity Arts Festival is quite a bourgeois festival. It leaves quite a lot of people out. So I wanted to go into Goa and work on a site which was open to anybody and everybody. And I wanted to play with time. So we chose two sites. One was the municipal market in Punjab, where they sell vegetables and fish. And the second was Kadamba bus station. Now Kadamba bus station is a very, very fast-paced, chaotic bus station because buses coming from everywhere and go out into Goa. So I wanted to introduce this element of time. What happens when 20 actors or 20 bodies try to slow down time in a public site? And who was my audience? My audience for that site, the performance was called Walk Back to Look, okay? And in Walk Back to Look, 20 bodies move imperceptibly slow. So a lot of times people who were running to catch the bus were pushing our actors. At other times in the market, somebody wanted to haggle and they would give our actor a dirty look. But when they started seeing not one, not two, not three, but 15, 20 people moving very slowly, doing really mundane things like speaking on their phones or waving to someone, they were intrigued and they would stop and walk back to look. So they would be like, what is this? Who is this idiot? And then say, oh, wait. So the idea was to get them to stop and walk back and look. And if you looked at the actor would hand you a chit, a note. Again, I'm quite interested in this trust between strangers. So the chit that's handed out, again, didn't have language because we didn't know what languages people spoke in the market or the bus station. So there were very, very simple things like smiley faces or flowers or ice cream cones or something that drew shoes and a heart with a shoe, like nice shoes, or a birthday cake. And what I was interested in was the unwitting audience. The audience who didn't enter our performance space, but we had entered their space. So with the Punjab vegetable market, these people became our audiences. The Aji who is selling fruit, you can pass it on. And they were handed these notes. There's another lady selling bananas. And because we went on the site so often, the students started to get free bananas. So we entered their space. We performed for them, and of course the passerby, the unwitting audience as I like to call it, they didn't enter our space, we went there, trusted us. And as you can see here, people started to gather, people stopped buying their vegetables, took out their cell phones. Oh, this is my favorite photograph because a bunch of bra and chaddi sellers and mobile sellers stopped everything, stopped selling stuff. You can pass the photographs around. And became interested in the performance at Punjab market. So there was no language, there was a site, and there was my audience. There's one photograph of the Kadamba bus station. All these people stopped and took out their mobile phones to start photographing our actors. Many times they joined the performance because they were like, something interesting is happening, let me slow down. So if I would come to you and shake your hand, they would stop and shake hands in slow motion. If we presented to say, let's take a selfie together, they would stop. So what we were able to do is really break this notion of that I'm the performer, you are the audience, and I'm really interested in complicating that relationship because I'm bored and tired of that hierarchy now. I don't want to be talked to, I want to be a part of something. And this performance happened on two sites in loops. And then people started coming every day to watch us. Because they're like, 12 o'clock they'll be there, let's go. So the unwitting audience became interested in us. We didn't pay him money, he didn't pay us any money. We interrupted his daily life by just being present on the site. And it's a very chaotic site, but I feel like it's quite cinematic as well. Just connected to this street project and the idea of the unwitting audience or the passerby. I'm really interested in the passerby. A similar project I carried out in a small neighborhood in Bangalore. It was called Walking Around. I'm really interested in, like, loafing around, just like loafing. Like, what are you doing? I'm just loafing around. We use that term a lot, like loafing. So I wanted to see what happens when children, I work a lot with children, and I think documentary theatre has quite a potential, and children become very interesting participants. We did a project called Walking Around when 10 children walked around a neighborhood. We walked around the neighborhood for 1 week. So they wanted to document the neighborhood, and they documented it through stories, fiction, and drawings, because they like to sketch. But we also introduced the element of interviewing. Could they interview the neighbors? So like I was saying to some people yesterday, that they chose a site called Basha stores where their bus drops them. And they always get chocolate or wafers that their parents don't allow. So they wanted to make Basha stores a site. They wanted to interview Mr. Chaco, who had come out of a coma, and in their story he became a superhero. Then they interviewed a cobbler who is in the Britannia Book of Records for the smallest chappal and the biggest chappal. So they led a walk across the neighborhood, and we stopped. We stopped and talked to the cobbler. We went to Basha stores, and they wrote a song, an ode to Basha stores. Then we did a run. And at that time, there was beef had just been banned in Bangalore, and these kids were really irritated. And keeping Peter Weiss in mind, I mean, what did he say? If you cannot take, what art cannot take itself to the street or something? So we took 8 to 12-year-olds on the street, and they protested. And their protest was what was close to them. Like I asked them, don't you want to protest school and homework? They're like, nah, it's so easy. They wanted to protest pollution, garbage. They wanted to protest the big things. And again, I was making a note, because what did Peter Weiss say also, that find audiences in factories, schools, streets. With Walk Back to Look, I think in a way, again, unknowingly we go to the street or we go to the market or the bus station. I found that audience by chance. And since, Kai began so beautifully talking about protest in documentary theatre and what is happening at JNU, I do want to invoke, and you can tell me what you feel, I want to try to replicate the protest song of the children. I have it here. I can pass it on. If you're willing to end on the song, we can end on it. But if you're not willing, that's fine as well. So you just have to, with a show of hands, tell me if you want to end it with a protest, or I can just read it and we stop. You can do it, but then you need to stand up. Everyone should have one copy at least. Can you pass a copy? Oh, we have less copies. Okay.
Yeah, we can share.
But you have to stand up again, really.
Stand up.
You can repeat whichever louder and enjoy.
Garbage is
So, really, I mean, you don't want to hear me out on this, right? Yeah. So yeah, I'd like to open it out, straight out, yeah. Since you're already in the beat. Yeah. So please feel free to ask, make comments, anything.
I have a question for Kai. So there was this point where you were talking about the paradoxes of looking at reality, or looking at reality and how it could either be a figment of imagination or it is the original document proving. So my question, again, I don't know if it comes under the ethical umbrella of looking at who gets to talk about these stories and who gets to represent such stories. Is that brought into the understanding of?
I think it's totally attached to this dynamic, right, between copy and original. So in whose name can you claim something, right? What is the legitimacy of a claim or of a representation of the pain of somebody else? Because I mean, mostly in this kind of documentary theater, you talk about the pain of others, not yours. And it's quite telling that actually the Holocaust studies as an academic subject formatted themselves by critiquing Peter Weiss' play. Because what I now told you as a story of agency, so like interrupt the hour zero mythology for the people who founded this academic subject of Holocaust studies, they were very much upset that he is not naming people and placing them in this, so already like in the whole investigation thing and already attached to the notes towards the definition of the documentary theory, you have this ethical confines, problems, and dynamics. Totally right. I cannot make any decision there, but of course these ethical problems, dilemmas, questions of representation are very much attention.
Pass that on to Anuja as well, because your talk looked a lot at a certain kind of intimacy amongst strangers. And again the question of who gets to represent. Do you look at any of those tangents in the work?
Yeah, of course, but and in the reading room especially, because their letters get used in other contexts, so they just give it to me. But I don't have to, there is a question of representation because they willingly come to it. There's no compulsion. And they willingly share the documents or the letters with me. But I'm a bit more, I'll say like I'm a bit more irreverent about representation. I'm a bit more interested in when fiction and documents collide or when they collide and when you cannot tell. And so in that sense, I don't take the term documentary to mean the absolute truth at all. Like if you've seen Lady Anandi, it treads always fiction and fact. I didn't want to talk about that show today. I performed it in that room actually in 2016, right behind here. So I didn't want to talk about that show, but for me it's more exciting to not know. But of course the question of who gets to represent, for sure. Who even gets to stand here, whose story do we tell, who's able to, of course. It is a power, it's a privilege. But I'm interested when all of this starts getting complicated. No, really.
But I think also that what we are doing in the workshop, so like devising your own text, this is already something that of course is also directed against the politics of representation that are attached to the classical drama canon. I mean, especially, I'm referring mostly now to the Western classical drama canon, but where you always have this story of men, so the the colleagues that are actors, female actors in the German-speaking theater, they don't have any roles between the age of 17 and 70 because their life is simply not depicted in the canonical place. So, and actually I want to make the advertisement that actually this practice of documentary theater very much is inspired by the wish and the struggle to broaden the confines of the classical canon and to broaden the scopes of people that can get represented. So this is very much the birthmark of it. Still, this is not freeing these practices from reflecting consciously what they're doing.
But that's interesting to just take off on that and to talk about the performer in the reading room. I mean, there are, like I'm saying, people stutter, people read, but there's no like, speak clearly. You allow that. They are given instruction, but even after that, people are very afraid. So there is no class, and sometimes it's more enjoyable because there's no affect. They make themselves incredibly vulnerable because they are not performers and yet they are there. And I think there's a great moment of magic at that moment. I mean, for want of a better word, I don't like that word magic in theatre so much, but it's an incredibly like, wow, like, what am I? And then when I start to work with actors, it irritates me. No, it really, because actors suddenly will turn on the voice and the body, but I was like, I don't want all this. So that affect has gone.
And I want to come back again to the workshop that we're doing. So there is this famous quote by Godard, right? So it's not about making political movies, but it's about making movies in a political way. So what is it about? So it's not about always to make plays where you scream equality, socialism, or whatever. But this Godard quote actually holds very high this way of how do we produce? How do we relate to each other? The very politics of producing. So this is also like the structure of our workshop. So this is why to me it's so important that everybody describes that what she or he has seen.
Yeah.
And also that we distinguish between a description and a judgment and all that, and still can, and of course the politics of suggestion. So, and all that.
And this politics of production, I take very seriously. I am very interested in the politics of production because I was involved with a lot of conventional theatre, with very well-known playwrights, award-winning playwrights, who make political plays about issues. But then the means by which they work with me as an actor or the other actors is very problematic. So his political play about, I don't know, China or Tibet or Kashmir, sometimes for me, or Sri Lankan suicide bombers is of no value. Because the means by which we produced it were extremely exploitative, right? So for me, it also came as a rejection to that kind of theatre that I've done. If I'm doing research, let my research be apparent. Let my actor come with no experience. Let me hear the actor speak for himself, herself, or in between self, whatever that is. So therefore, even with Serendipity, and I keep saying it, they're sponsoring our symposium this year, the idea was to challenge it. That you want to do a festival in Goa and none of the fish vendors, the vegetable vendors, the people at the market can access your festival. But they were very, very, very open to my challenge. So we challenged that. And the last reading room was at a place called Courtyard in Bangalore, which is again very posh. Then they gave us a small room which was a bedroom for the staff, which was very nice. Yeah, so the means of production is with Lady Anandi, there's no outside funding, it's crowdsourced, so 50 people have supported it. There's no fancy arts foundation supporting that work. So it becomes a loose production where I'm using planters from JNU when I come. I have one crew member, so it becomes very loose, DIY, very rough around the edges, but that's the aesthetic then you go with. Because it is linked to this idea of the politics of production as well.
So yeah, other interventions?
Yeah, sure.
Please.
So, want to go first?
Well, yeah.
You can go first.
My question was, is documentary theatre always go with political? It's something like in documentary films or documentary cinemas. We can also document the life of some particular people. So I was asking, can this be done in documentary? I mean, if something like that is done, can we call it a documentary theatre?
Well, let me give you an example of a play that was very successful in the festival circuit, I mean globally actually. It's got Squad's Western Society. So it's a British-German performing collective. And they made a starting point for their performance a video, a YouTube clip. And they researched the YouTube clip online that had the least clicks. So they wanted to find the most boring piece in the internet. So, and they found something which was actually a home cam recorded birthday somewhere in the 1980s in the Midwest of the US, where Granny is doing karaoke and two women are eating cake, and then this 100-minute performance is about reenacting this YouTube video, and they let the people participate from the audience, and then they also do always live editing and all that. And still, of course, it's a political practice, right? Because it's about Western society in the 80s and what for strange game they do, but still it's a lot of fun. So somehow this would be my relation to that. So I mean, actually, we go back with Brecht. Entertainment. Thinking can be fun. So don't think the documentary theater is boring as hell.
No, I didn't say boring.
Okay.
I just asked that is it like if you can call that also a documentary theater?
Yeah.
When we just take suppose we are portraying a life of some particular person.
Yeah.
So if that also we can call
Absolutely.
I would say so. Especially in the third period, there is really an extension of the notion of the document. I mean, of course, then every scholar, every person has to make the decision at which point it becomes nonsensical. But I think this Western society is, in a very classical sense, based on a document.
And a lot of it is also biography. It doesn't have to be political. Like Rimi's famous work, Black Tie, is a biography of a person who's adopted. So she comes and talks about herself. Of course, unraveling other kinds of politics, but it's biographical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
If we could just go back to the second point of documentary theatre being the reflection of life.
Yes, represented by mass media.
So did theatre in any way reflect the Holocaust at the time it was happening?
I would tend to say no, although I'm really not an expert about that. I think there was theater in the camps. This is one of the first things.
Theatre in the camp.
In the camps itself, yeah. There were theater groups. And I think they pretty much reflected on that, what is happening. So this would be the first thing that comes to my mind. But of course, actually during the time of the Nazi regime in Germany, there was no German documentary theater.
Just a film, sorry to just, just
Please.
Night and Fall, this film.
Of course,
yeah.
Alain René.
Alain René, yeah. So that film has what? The concentrating camps, all you see are certain remnants, objects. Some really strange things that are left behind. So objects might probably start to play that sort of so not document as the thing that is happening, but something which is in the nature of something absolutely mute and yet left behind. So, Night and Fall has.
Had there been similar creation back then, do you feel that could have had a better impact on, I mean, if there were more such artworks?
But Alain René is after. I mean, it's the work after. Or am I mistaken?
Sorry, what?
So the
It's
night,
after.
night,
Yeah.
Night
so
much
Alain-
later.
Much later.
Much later.
Oh. So
Much later.
no, the point basically is you are getting me on a point.
No.
I don't want to claim that this has not happened. So I say in the camps there was theater. I'm not an expert on how they did plays and how they related to their lives in the camp and to the reality of annihilation, but for sure they would have done that. But of course this had no outreach. Right?
This is something which Italo Calvino writes about, right? That the whole point of the Nazis were doing is to not just not leave any Jew, but not leave any witness of the Jew. Of course, that itself was not saturated, but that was the kind of extremity of that project.
So
So to that extent, by definition, that project couldn't have any
Yep.
document.
I would very much think.
Yeah, that was the Italian Calvino has written about that. Yeah, I was curious about, particularly after, and I've seen Rehearsing, which is a little conventional by that standard,
Yes.
by these standards. But I was just thinking, but I love the performance, it's a different story. I was thinking, is there something like a documentary actor? Yeah, a paradox, because
I
you're
was gonna say.
yeah, it's a paradox. Because after all, even the non-actors, the ones who come in here reading, they might not be actors. Everyone has a theory of theatre. Everyone has a theory of acting. You might not be an actor, but you have seen acting maybe from school, as a school child, to television, to cinema. So to that extent, even if they're not actors, you're asking them to read something, already the theory of acting is coming between them and what they do. So to that extent, they're actors.
For sure.
They're
Yeah.
thinking of themselves at that moment
As actors.
as actors.
And it's meant to be like
And meant to be
that.
like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's that strange sort of...
Imagination of the future, I think, is very critical, especially for me personally, when we look at it on social media. Like, I'm here, and I was like, oh, this is so quiet. But when I'm at home and I'm seeing it on Facebook and Twitter, I'm like, oh my God, it's so agitated and there's so much noise. And here you come and it's like,
It's too cool.
yeah, it's too quiet.
That's
it's
where
very silent.
something's
Yeah,
going on. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
So one other point which occurred to me listening to you guys, in conventional theatre, say Shakespeare. Even in conventional theatre, particularly in conventional theatre, there could be something concealed going on, a concealed document. When the playwright deliberately hides the document because he wants to write a convention, it's conventional. But actually, he or she is inviting the audience to recognize the document behind all their creative. So for instance, Carl Schmitt, the problematical theory, wrote a very interesting book called Hector Hamlet. Yeah. In which he said Hamlet is actually nothing but a reference to James I's marriage with Bess. It's nothing but it's a real event in history. The only thing is, there was a documentary theatre. That's all. So he had to just write a play and wrote the greatest play of all time. Merely, ultimately, to just get the audience to take pleasure in the scandal and at the same time take pleasure in the theatre.
But it might also be connected to censorship practices.
Yeah, of course.
Because you as theatre maker, long time in histories and places until today, you're not free to do what you want to do. So and I think also, especially the Weimar theatre, so where Piscator was a guy from, they benefited so much that after 1918, the king was away, the state was broken and censorship fell. So this is also why all these weird and crazy experiments happened around that time, and also the Regietheater, so the theater of the director, was born out of this dynamics of the censorship that fell.
There is a question with regard to acting actually. So I'm an acting student, and we have certain exercises to involve bringing an object to the class and sort of to undergo a psychological process to remember what is association with, and then to feel it in yourself and to sort of confer a certain movement to your body with regard to that. So when people like these are placed in the reading room and they are given this particular document, is the problem that they will provide a certain perfection of feeling it, or sort of a certain, not perfection, but I don't know how to phrase this, which is not required.
Where are you an acting student?
I'm sorry,
The repertory, yes.
not the
No, you mean
there's a course.
the course, I know exactly.
There's a part-time course.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the problem, or it's not even a problem. When actors come and read in the reading room, it's very pleasurable. Because suddenly everyone just talking loudly, which is so
How
nice.
regard it as a script rather than something, I don't know.
It's connected to what I was
Yeah,
saying.
what you were saying. Though I feel like there's no perfection of emotion for sure. I would disagree. There I feel like the non-actor provides a lot of windows into an emotional response that sometimes they don't even know they're doing. sometimes it's actually great fun to have actors in the reading room as well, and I've done that just to mix it up a bit. But I've given the letters to actors to then perform separately. It's also not fair to keep a non-actor next to an actor, and then that sometimes worries me. But I've taken the letters and given it to all actors, and then we work with it separately. Like I said, they wrote scripts, they wrote responses to letters. So what I've done in the reading room, I bring the responses. So fictional letters become a part of it as well. But I don't know about this perfection.
Perfection is the wrong
No. But there have been actor friends who come and then they just read.
Tell me something, I'm curious. Just curious. So suppose you asked to just take 2 minutes and write what they want to read. Then they read the letter and they write. Would that writing, because they write it themselves, it doesn't come somewhere else. Would that writing then partly take away this actor's sort of, this armature of the actor?
Cool.
Yeah. Because writing is a different kind of an act.
Yeah.
An actor does everything but write. Yeah, by definition.
But a lot of the letters that they bring, they've written themselves.
Right.
So people bring their own letters. Yeah. Only that they don't get to read it because I mix it up and give it to somebody else because there's an emotional curation of the way the letters are organized. And by chance, sometimes they read their own letters. And actually, your own letter people read worse than they would read someone else's. So they're going over it very fast because they know it. Yeah.
Yes.
So nothing, just add on this thing. She is talking about the indigenous kinds of theatre performance. There is a training system, there are the kinds of training modules. She is talking about the things. There is some specific text based on text, only based on text. You are writing the text. Through different, on the spot of you are writing a text, imagination through utopian, non-utopian, any kinds of ideas. Writing the text and through the text, on the spot you are going through characterization of the things. So there is no character, there is the emotions or decision. You are making a decision to do the anything. But this is about the decision. So she is talking about the characterization. Once you talking about the method, there is a method, also something matters. It's dependent on the text. So earlier, first day in the workshop, I am asking about something, the elements of drama. In Indian context, Western context, there is the elements. Also text, plot, sets, these are audience, these are the elements. So that's why I am asking, it's by my concern, not her concern. My concern is that once we talking about the documentary theatre, so where is also documents, it means text. There is actor, decision. If you are taking about the decision who will decide? Rather than director will be decision behind the actor, actors become a director to decide. So be a specific site and all the things. These are similar to these things. So I am hoping, so you little bit clear about, and Kai also, little bit clear about the elements, where is existing in protest theatre, documentary theatre, which kinds of, is similar with indigenous and Western elements of drama, elements of documentary.
So kind of documentary theatre also have an apparatus.
Yeah.
Not just document, but kind of combination of elements, just like classical theatre.
Yeah. Maximum time you Kai reference given a classical theatre. So I have same concern in indigenous terms. I am talking about according to Natasha, there is a some class, element class.
I don't know if this is now a proper relation to that.
Just comment.
What your point is. But I would like to look at it from a very different perspective. And I feel very problematic to assign certain elements to. I mean, of course, this is what in scholarship very often happens because this is how you make career in scholarship.
Yeah.
So you have to define elements and name them and attach your name to this kind of reading. But I think something that I uphold very high is Bert States, who was a theater phenomenologist in the 80s. And he wrote this book, Great Reckonings in Little Rooms. And there he comes up with this theory that theater is the most hungry medium that is existing. Because theater, ever since, always consumes realities and makes it part of themselves. So, and then these things that were hot and fresh realities in the very moment when they were consumed, today now they are conventions. example would be electric light.
Yeah.
So when electric light was introduced into the European auditoriums, it totally reshaped the way how a whole generation of playwrights like so the Ibsen and these Kammerspiel and all that. It was just possible through theater's consuming of a new technological innovation. And today, the most boring theater that we could imagine is where we go and where people like have a curtain or working with lights and suddenly it goes bright. So for us today, it's really a convention, even a painful convention. But it's just like 150 years ago, and it was brand new, and it was a total shock. So, and or props on stage. It's just happening through the manifestos of French naturalism. So that people put real things on stage, like a table or a chair. Now, today in every drama academy, you do a study of a scene, and the people go in their props room and bring things. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when Zola was writing and imagining the true naturalistic theater, it was a revolutionary thing. So, and this is now, I would describe it. So theater always, and I think maybe, I'm not a big fan of it's the only medium, I don't know, but for sure it's a medium that has this capability of always integrating realities into it. And then there's always these sad songs about this will be the end of the theater. When the robot enters the theater or the algorithm, this will be the end of the theater. No, this is what theater always did. Theater always consumes reality. So I would rather put there than to assign certain elements to certain forms.
How about unreality? Let's say you are talking about theater consuming reality. When you talk about Dante's Divine Comedy, I was thinking, and I still could not frame what's happening, but there's one thing that I am thinking is myth. Myth. How do we include, or how do we see myth in these documentary theaters? How do you play this myth?
Something which by historical norms would be not historical.
And also commenting very much to that what is happening. So using the myth as a folio to talk about present issues in how, because this is what they always did with mythologies on theater, again, especially in states affected by censorship. So people always then like rework mythologies or old plays. But it would be a nice question to think about.
It's a very interesting question. It's also this value of concealment. So, for instance, in classical Greek theatre, there is not a single play apart from one that we know, which refers to a real historical incident or event, which is Aeschylus's play The Persians, which refers to the Persian War. Every other play is based on myth. Yeah. Now, one way of understanding this would be, oh, this is theatre of myth. The other way of understanding this would be, or rather asking the question would be, this is deliberate.
Yeah, everything is about referring to their own society, but doing it through myth and not actually referring to any incident or occurrence which the actual society can recognize. So that question itself can become very interesting. Myth is a kind of screen for history. I mean, that would be one hypothesis, obviously. That's not the only one. So it's also this question of concealment. Theatre is a kind of concealment of the world, and yet conveying. But myths also practices of theatre. It's a ritual theatre, an indigenous theatre of rituals, whose entire encoding in terms of stories is mythical stories. Whether it's Mahabharata or some other kind of story, which are repeated in different combinations.
There was an example, there's Draupadi Amrit festival that happens, where the whole village becomes a site for the performance of the Mahabharata, where there's a 20-foot Duryodhana. They perform in winter and night, they do a ritualistic in the temples, and they run across the villages to kill Duryodhana. And then people go to sleep, so their whole life that day, those 15 days is around the festival and performing it.
I want to continue to chew a little bit on this question, because I think it's very interesting. But now someone occurs in my mind a question that based very much its perspective on dramatic understanding of theatre. Greek tragedies that we have, I mean, we just have some snippets of them and some whole translated that came to us. They all include rituals, for example.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So real religious rituals.
Real religious rituals.
So it's reality that is happening there.
Only
So
the stories are
so even the actors were conceived as priests and as ritual practitioners and not as arty people or expressing themselves. So I think this is also so interesting. So here at the very beginning you have, I mean, there are people that say Greek theater is actually like revue. So it's does that make sense?
Sure.
Like a show.
Sure.
So it's a collection of numbers.
Yeah.
You have the song, you have the sad song, you have the ritual, and all that.
It's a cabaret.
Yeah, you could say it's a cabaret.
Cabaret. Yeah.
Form-wise, it's a cabaret.
Cabaret.
And this already points to the fact how much it really consumes reality and real things, because this is what.
And the other extreme of this ritualist theatre I saw very recently, 2 weeks ago in Varanasi, where the Ganga Aarti happens. There are hundreds of people poised there, and all the 8 priests are performing for all of us. They know where the audience is. They have loudspeakers. They are playing like Hindi bhajans. That ritual of performance is completely contaminated, and we have thousands of people watching them, paying to watch them, to sit on the boats to watch the Ganga Aarti. That to me was a real. It's very dangerous what was happening, because in the name of ritual they used performance so slyly. They used all the things of performance. Spectacle, very fit actors, loud music, and we were all swept up by it. Yeah.
So it's a very much about one of the other things that have expressed Ramnagar of Kazim.
Yeah. Ramnagar.
So Kai also says, talking about the sites, there is different sites. One side from Rajbhavan, there is a Ram place. One side of Ravan house, they are also there. One side of Sita's place. So performance go around the is the site aspect.
Both months, the entire month. So that's interesting history. So again, that's something yesterday 3 of us were talking. There's a history of theatre itself. In all of this, theatre itself is a documentary history, or a document of theatre. So, for instance, when I went to Ramnagar, that was 2004. Electric lights were taboo. So the prince there, from the family, the princely family, as well as the district magistrate, who were the chief guests in the Shahra part. They're there. It's a heritage thing. But you will not have electric lights. You'll only do it under lanterns, right? Because that was understood to be the purity of the tradition. But of course, the pressure, the media pressure, was so much. The BBC, when we went, the BBC was there with the camera. And there was tremendous controversy there whether the BBC should be allowed to film it. But in the course of the last 15 years, all that has changed. Now we have proper film made, which is IGNC has an entire film on this. There is proper lighting there, electric lighting. Things change. But this is history also. History of technology and the history of ritual. Sort of going together. So yes, if there's nothing else, let us thank these two wonderful people. For not just their job, but really agreeing to be with us in our very interesting times. Thank you. Yeah.